All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is Finance Committee meeting dated September 30th, 2021. Paul, do you want to go ahead and take the roll?
Alderman Huffer is not here. Alderman Nelson?
Here.
Alderman Hanneman?
Here.
Member Cheehee?
Here.
Member Howard?
Here.
Member Schmidt is not here. Member Cheehee?
Here.
Member Howard?
Here.
Member Schmidt is not here, but you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's all rise and join me. Pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For those following at home and along, we will just hold over one item because of the published agenda, and that'll be your review of minutes from the August 24th meeting. Since we didn't actually meet on Tuesday, and it's not specifically listed on the agenda for tonight, we'll pick that up. One of us appropriately at the end of September, end of the third quarter of the year, start thinking about 2022 already. And these nice blue binders that some of us have, late night reading materials, are nothing more or nothing less than just that subject to 2022 budget as recommended by the staff and the mayor.
It's on our agenda.
Okay, hold off one moment. We'll open up the citizens' comment period. Does anybody want to mention anything, address the committee before we get started? Sounds like no. I'll go ahead and close the citizen comment period, and we'll move on then to item 3, which is as prepared by the mayor and staff. And with that, I think you would like to make some opening remarks.
If I may.
Do we have to hit the right buttons here?
Let's see.
If it's red or green, it's green, okay. Thank you, Chairman Cheehee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Creek Court in the beautiful community of Franklin, the third safest community in Milwaukee County, second only to Waterford. Anyway, last year we talked a little bit about a little out of the ordinary routine over the last dozen or so years, and I was happy and pleased with the work that the committee did last year. It was very helpful to us. A unique set of eyes is always good, especially on a budget like this. With Peggy coming on board, twist on the budget going into last year, and that continues this year, and I found it very beneficial to the community. The goal here in this budget, my goal, putting this out to the staff, was to do the old cliche, do more with less. Out to the staff was to do the old cliche, do more with less. Take a look at your budget and see what you're doing that's been very effective and what's not, and adjust your budget accordingly. And also let us know really what you need to enhance the job. Also let us know really what you need to enhance the job that you're doing. And my appreciation to our department heads. Once again, they did a tremendous job. They came to us, to Paul and to Peggy, with numbers that were accurate. Paul and to Peggy with numbers that were accurate, not, as he was in the room, not overly inflated, but workable numbers. And at the end of the day, we're able to work with them, put a budget in front of you that's balanced. I'm pleased that, again, this year, it's been consistent over the last maybe 15 years, where we're coming to the taxpayers with a slight reduction in their tax bill based on growth covering increase in levies. Paul's going to correct me. $500 and some odd thousand available spending due to growth, and we're taking slightly about $25,000 less than that. So that'll be a net reduction. Of course, assessed value and all that stuff. But what I'd like, if the committee can do that for us this year, is to take a close look at the budget and look at where we can, again, be a little bit more efficient, potentially. And maybe now our staff has been excellent at changing the way they do their jobs to do it better. So they're close to what they do, but if you have some ideas, I'm ready and willing to hear it, and so are they. Aren't you, staff? Yeah. They're great people. So with that, again, I want to thank our department heads. They did a great job, as usual. They do a wonderful job managing their people. And I am pleased that in this budget, you'll see 2 fully funded firefighters. The chief and we need 12. He sometimes negotiates less than that, but I say we need 12. So 2 is a start. 2 is a lot more than we've ever been able to provide since we did the big hiring in, 97? 96 and 97 when we did 12. So that's a good 96 and 97 when we did 12. So that's a good start, 2 new firefighters. We're also adding 1 new full-time laborer in the Department of Public Works. That's a first responder position too, so that's important. Last year, as you remember, we added a first responder position too, so that's important. Last year, as you remember, we added a police officer. So we're whittling away at the public safety. We need to keep our eye on that ball and keep going towards that end. So again, I thank my department heads. I thank Peggy and Paul. Tremendous job. I thank my department heads. I thank Peggy and Paul. Tremendous job. I was actually sitting in Peggy's office more than anywhere else in this building over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But I'm proud of the budget that Paul and Peggy put together for us. And I hope you can find some other cost savings and benefit the city of Franklin. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Anyone have any comments, or I guess as we get started here, thank you for the oversight on the police, or public safety, and specifically the fire department. I think they're on our agenda for today as well. If I'm Mayor. And I believe if we're following this sequence, it sounds like we're going to talk about the inspection services a little bit first. Is that the
Before we get started with the individual departments, at your places are 2 documents that we distributed today. If you decide you would like to make a change, we have a recommended motion that you can make that's sitting in front of you if you wish to make that. Most of these are recommended. Most of these are recommended changes, and then at the end of the whole process of the review, we'll come back and look at all of them as a committee, and then you can decide which ones you want to include and which ones you may decide second thoughts about. So the recommended motion is in front of you. Staff will keep track of any changes that you are. The recommended motion is in front of you. Staff will keep track of any changes that you are recommending at this point in time. The other comment I would make for you is that page 8 of your, well, there's the introduction, and everyone should have read the introduction with the green light you're on. The other item is page 8 of your budget summary is the entire city's budget, or governmental budget that's there. So for instance, when we are looking at the public safety group, you can see that there are operating costs within the general fund, but there are, and so you'll be able to see where those operating costs are located and then where the various capital expenditures are. So that page 8 is something you may want to keep available to yourselves over time. When we get to the budget overview again later at our next meeting, we'll talk more about how those pieces fit together. 59 of your book. And you have with you today Scott Satula, the inspection department head, to help you understand.
would you like to give us just a quick overview?
Sure.
Whatever
you,
you want to
Mr.
share with the committee?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee. For my budget, it probably is pretty easy. Other than personnel cost increases, our 22 budget increased slightly for office and operating supplies, partly because the state is going to go to a new version of the Commercial Building Code, 2021 version. So we have to buy new code books for all the staff for that. And we're going to do that gradually because they're very expensive. To buy new code books for all the staff for that. And we're going to do that gradually because they're very expensive. They're usually like $1,000 a suite. So we're going to buy one suite because they will probably be going to this version of the code in about a year and a half. So we're going to get our first suite for next year, so we can get get familiar with the changes. We also have an increase for state permit seals. You have to, for every permit for a new home, you have to put a seal on the permit card. It's a reimbursable expense. The customer actually pays for that with their permit fees, but we have to buy them ahead of time from the state. A lot of development coming in. We want to make sure we have enough on hand because at one time there actually was a shortage of seals that you couldn't even purchase. Created kind of a problem. I actually had another community call me and tried to buy some of ours, and I was short, so I couldn't sell them to them. So that's another increase. We're trying to buy some vehicle laptop holders because we do have laptops. Difficult to type in a car. I think the police could probably help me with that, but we need to get some kind of a stand or something in the cars for them to do their typing so they can function properly instead of trying to put it in their lap or on their side.
Do you use tough books?
I actually know they're just a basic, it's not a tough book for it, and so far so good. It actually can split. You can take the screen off of it if you want to just hold that part of it in the field. Mm-hmm. So our inspectors are still getting used to it. Some use them all the time. Some use them half the time. Some leave them in the car. They use them when they get back from the job site because it might be raining out or muddy in the job site. We don't want to drop a computer functions in the vehicle. Mm-hmm. That way, between inspections, there might be 15 minutes. They're sitting in a car waiting for their next inspection. They can actually do work. So when they come back to the office, they don't have to spend that time in the office. One other thing we're looking for is a large TV, a large screen TV, because we want to try and start doing some electronic plan review services, and a lot of the contractors do like to submit things electronically now. Matter of fact, we do require a PDF electronic copy of all plans that goes into our BSNA software. So with that, it's very difficult to look at a huge plan on a small computer screen. You're constantly moving things around. Yeah, the state says they're doing it, but they have big screens. It's the only way it works. So we'd like to start out with at least one of them for next year to see how that process works. And there's a lot of other things we're using a big screen TV for right now in our office for training for BSNA. That's actually one of our inspectors for BSNA. That's actually one of our inspectors' personal TV brought in. So it's working very well. One other large item we're requesting for capital improvement is a replacement vehicle for our 2011 Jeep Liberty. It's one of our 6 staff vehicles. 2011 Jeep Liberty, it's one of our 6 staff vehicles. We're asking to purchase a new 2022 Ford Explorer for $28,467. It's actually less than last year's purchase that we made. For whatever reason, the price came down on the same vehicle. And this is all part of the Fund 41 replacement of rolling stock. So it's right in the schedule of replacing vehicles. It's not any sooner or later. That's really it for the budget. If there's any questions, I was just going to talk briefly about department activity.
Just real quick, activity increases in building permits and electrical inspections and so forth. It seems like this is an ongoing challenge as that roller coasters up and down or ebbs and flows is having adequate staff or not enough, or we have them and then we don't need them, and then when we need them we don't have them, and whatever, versus what you have available, and will it be adequate to get it done? Are we working quicker, faster, smarter? And hopefully the answer is the last one, with the same number of bodies to allow that to happen.
Yeah, actually, since I've been here the last 3 years, we've used everybody, and we probably could use a little bit more help. Getting our permits out on time and trying to
give good customer service to everybody. I can tell you, and I was going to talk about a little later, the new BSNA software that we put on board this year has helped us tremendously. It's made us much more efficient. It's allowed, like I said before, the inspectors to do work in the field where they couldn't do it before. The inspectors to do work in the field where they couldn't do it before. Everything is in the software. It's a one-stop shop. We don't have to search around for all the different permits and the status of a permit. We now have a great interdepartmental communication between fire and planning and engineering that we didn't have before. That was my biggest communication between fire and planning and engineering that we didn't have before. That was my biggest complaint when I came on board is we don't talk in the city. We have to call and ask things. With this software now, you can see everything in the tree, the status of every permit, status of every inspection, where they are in the project, where they are in the project, when they're at final, did they get their occupancy? That's all showed in that new software. And all the departments have a chance to look at it now. It's at their fingertips. So we didn't have that before. So it's a big change and a very positive change for customer service and our staff. So that is helping us be more efficient. We never know how much work we're going to get coming in the office. I always say it's like McDonald's. We don't know how many customers we're going to get today. They just walk in, they bring projects in. But luckily so far with our staff, we've been staying busy. It's a constant, steady busy, and we think we can handle what comes in. So far it's really going to happen in a year. COVID threw a wrench in everything, but it caused a lot of delays in construction because you can't get materials. Costs have gone up. We've had some people cancel permits because they can't do the project, they can't afford it. So things like that. COVID has changed how we do business, but again, we're keeping up with our staff. So.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments on the software because so many times I think, and maybe the council members too know that they're voting on items and spending money, and software is kind of a buzzword. You kind of know what it is, but the rest of it's all kind of touchword. You kind of know what it is, but the rest of it's all kind of touchy-feely, and it's hard to get your arms around it. But knowing that it's useful and is helpful in the application, technology is obviously a tool that we have to continue to explore anytime we can to make ourselves make ourselves more customer service and more efficient. So thank you for those comments. Anybody else on the committee? All right, thank you very much. Peggy.
I just have a couple things. Scott is really underestimating all of the work they've been doing on BSNA and the efficiencies. So we really do appreciate those estimating all of the work they've been doing on BSNA and the efficiencies. So we really do appreciate those comments. But also they're offering some online services now as well.
Right.
And I know that was born out of COVID a little bit, but I think that's going to help us going forward. And then just one more thing real quick is we do have some temporary help available, and Scott's been doing a really good job managing. He hasn't used it, but if we do get peaks available, and Scott's been doing a really good job managing, he hasn't used it, but if we do get peaks at certain times, he does have some of those funds available that we will continue to carry forward.
Okay, thank you. Paul, just for housekeeping, we have the big, I think, 251 page for CapEx. Everyone see that in their books? That's the CapEx. Everyone see that in their books? That's the expanded fold-out. But I'm not sure how we, is it alphabetically department-wise?
It's alphabetical by department. So the inspection single item on that group is on page 251. Page 251, it's the second last item, inspection services.
Thank you. The new
is the vehicle that Scott was alluding to.
Everybody up here have that, so because you'll see 251 in your packets over and over and over. So find those. Okay.
We have Courtney Day with us, our health director. And for the committee's purposes, that begins on the general fund operating costs start on page 201, and the grant activity starts on page 244. Ms. Day.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to a bit about the health department and our budget for this year. If I could, I'm going to take you through our narrative for a little bit. We do have some updates as this was submitted towards the end of July, so a couple months have passed. Page 202, for the key changes to our budget for grant funding. The Health Department has been offered additional grant dollars. They will come before the council next week for formal approval. The first one is an American Rescue Plan Act totaling $460,000 that 2021 and goes through December 31st of 2024. The grant that is listed there, the CDC Crisis Response Grant, the award for that was $84,700, which we can use from July 1st of 2021. The final grant is an immunization supplemental grant for $70,000, again from July 1st of this year through June 30th of 2024. And the main purpose of those three grants is for COVID recovery efforts, so we can continue to work on COVID as it comes up and work on things that are specific. So before council next week, we do have some preliminary ideas of what we would like to spend that money on, but we do have that money available to us. So if there are costs incurred for having to stand up testing centers, mass immunization clinics, overtime, to do that won't impact the city's budget. So that was all good news. Then also, I'll talk about my personnel changes in a bit. Is that me? I'll talk about my personnel changes in a bit, but I also we're awarded the continuation of that grant for years 6 through 10. So I know I had alluded to a few times in my narrative that if we didn't get this grant, we would be looking for other funds to supplement our staff member who was completely funded through that grant. But since we were awarded the continuation, we won't have to worry about finding those extra funds. And then from the personnel side of things, we were making two changes this year. The first is a requested internal this year. The first is a requested internal change in position from our, it would be an internal change open to somebody who's already within the health department. We're not seeking an external hire for this. And it would be for the public health program, seeking an external hire for this. And it would be for the public health program manager position. This would be sort of a de facto number 2 in the health department to handle things when I am away, as far as like meetings and communication and that type of thing. But it also came to light during the COVID pandemic, when there were dueling meetings and other important things that the health department had to do. We needed to have more than one person, and to have a consistent person be able to attend those meetings or speak on behalf of the health department was needed. This individual outside of COVID would be helping with grant management, all of the grants that we have, as well as being in charge of our community health assessment and community health improvement plan, which are statutory requirements of us through the state that we have to do every 5 years. So this person will be doing a lot of sort of middle management type things with grants and those two main documents. Transfer will be open to full-time staff in my department that meet the qualifications for it. We're hoping to make that posting in the near future now that I'm back. And any change in salary that would occur, this is a level 8 position, any change in salary that might occur would be handled by grant dollars for those positions. The second ask is for a clinic nurse position. This is a 0.1 FTE to come on in a surge capacity only. So again, we have money right now for COVID to scale up and scale down with temporary workers, but that's finite. To say that, there won't be another outbreak or mass clinic or other things that we might need a skilled person to do that has an RN to be able to come in and give immunizations or do contact tracing for other diseases. So this position would only be brought into play as and again, we do have grant funding for that through our emergency preparedness grants, which is a grant that we get every year that would be able to cover this position. So any staffing changes that we are making this year should not impact the city's budget at all. It would all be coming from health grant dollars. And then finally, we do have one capital request. We are looking to replace our 2007 minivan with a newer SUV. The purpose of it is just to have a more efficient SUV. The purpose of it is just to have a more efficient car. The purpose of using it would be for educational events, homebound clinics, home visits, and to have another car that has the health department logo, City of Franklin logo on it, so when we are out, people know who we are. Another car that has the health department logo, City of Franklin logo on it, so when we are out, people know who we are when we come up and we're not a stranger, knocking at their door. The funding for that, we did receive a rather generous donation last year from the Franklin Seniors organization when they disbanded, and the goal for that money was that we would use it for seniors, and the majority of our health programs are based on seniors. Our home visits are for seniors. Our homebound flu vaccines are seniors. So we feel that is a good use of that money. And then we would be asking for the remainder of that from this possibility that we might be able to cover that with grant funds. I just don't know that at this time. And if that is possible, we would certainly cover it with grant dollars and not use city funding for it. But at this time, I don't know that that's a possibility. That's about all I have, if anyone has questions.
Just one, as we continue on this path with the pandemic and where we've come from and been and now what's in front of us, it appears that the youth population of our country, the 5 to 11-year-olds, are going to be the next age group, if the government is following its traditional pattern. And forgive me if I have the number wrong, but I think I heard somewhere it's 46 million approximately in the U.S. that fit that category. Will probably be the next wave coming through the vaccination process. Is there anything we've learned from what we've done already, either good, bad, or indifferent, want to maybe try to do better, not do better, or what will be the challenges maybe with this younger group? I'm just curious from your thoughts and what, as we kind of go forward. I know now we've got parents involved, approvals and whatever, and schools, and whether we do it there or here or, on school, I don't know what, but I'm just curious. You're in this every day, living it, kind of, what your crystal ball might look like as it regards that item.
That we've been sort of being told. It looks like the 5 to 11-year-olds would be approved sometime at the end of October, early part of November. I've been talking to our school district about sort of how that would be rolled out, who might be involved in that, and looking at where the gaps might be in that. Historically, however, they usually don't go much lower than 7 or 8-year-olds. So if this does go down to 5-year-olds, we'll need to make sure that there are adequate places that parents can take their children. We've done clinics for COVID in a variety of settings. We've done them here in City Hall. We do have a mass clinic plan to do it at the middle school if we would need to stand up something there. So we are in talks with the school district right now about making sure that there are, whether it's the health department or the hospital systems or whoever, that there's enough vaccine available and enough places available for parents to take. I think the biggest challenge at this point is the same challenge with the general populace, is just, the questions about, efficacy and safety and whatnot, and just making sure that we have all of the information out there that parents can make those decisions to the best of their ability to get everybody in and get vaccinated. Just doing a good job of keeping their own data as far as individuals who have contracted COVID and have to be isolated, and then looking at who their close contacts are to quarantine, and how many of those students might not need to quarantine because they're fully vaccinated. I think that tells a good tale in school. If they're exposed, if they're fully vaccinated, it does keep their schedule and their life a little bit more on the normal side, rather than having to bounce back and forth so much like last year when there was no vaccine.
Comment?
I have a question for Ms. Stino and Mr. Watzenberg. Do we have the capital budget request for the vehicle in our capital improvement plan? I'm just not seeing health department in here, and that's what I'm looking for.
I think it's on 251.
Yeah, it's in there.
251?
Yep.
We just have the one line, so it's easy to...
I only looked at that page 5 times, and I just wanted to make sure that was covered in there.
All right. Any other questions? If I see none, we will move on. Thank you for your time and your comments. Great work this year as well, and I'm sure 22 will be more of the same, continuing. What do we have next, Paul?
We have Heath Eddy, the planning manager. And in your books, it's on page 2, beginning on page 212 with a capital request on 252. Heath?
Yeah, my budget request. Yeah, my budget request this year, other than personnel, is flat. All I did was I rearranged some numbers, I rearranged deck chairs, and between supplies budgets and the service budget to account for slightly different priorities. Each budget to account for slightly different priorities in between them. And then the other thing I did this year was I reinstated under contractual services under line 5219. There's a number in there, 6,023. That is not a new item. That is in there, 6,023. That is not a new item. That is money that's actually in existing purchase orders, and I'm just keeping them in the budget as basically keeping them there in case we run into issues where we have to hire professional consultants to help us out on an as-needed basis. We've done that in the past. We haven't had to do that as of yet this year, but I want to keep that in the line so it's already there. But as I say, it's not a new monetary number. It's just it's existing purchase orders that have already been technically spent or committed, dating back to the 2020 budget, I think it is. The other thing I've included, the other big piece is, or there's two pieces, capital improvements. One, there's a $6,500 computer equipment purchase. My planners, typically a lot of the plans we get are on large PDF documents, and their existing computers right now are such that they can open up one document, but if they have to open up another document, the flexibility to be able to do anything electronic, and they resort to having to use paper, which is sort of what we're trying to get away from, but they can't get away from it because their equipment doesn't function very well. So at the request or the recommendation of Jim Metelsky, we incorporated a budget request for $6,500, which includes front to include updated graphics cards so that so our computers can handle the graphic load of documents that large. The other piece per priority is a budget line of $40,000 for the update of the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. This is I guess we'd call a full update, reconsidering the whole thing, updating demographics, probably incorporating some kind of community survey to indicate what their preferences are, and then moving forward with a new recreation plan document itself. Otherwise, that's all that is to change in my budget. Operationally speaking, one thing we are doing, or two things we're doing. One is the continuing UDO rewrite project, which contract was initiated in June of this year, which was for this year's budget. That purchase order continues and will be going well through. That project will probably continue through probably all of next year. And then we are the sign permit process and administration from inspection services. So my department will be doing that. And the average is about 87 permit applications a year. So we'll be picking that up in addition to our other workload.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Heath, for your work on this as well. And I had a brief conversation with the city administrator, I think yesterday or the day before. And as I'm looking at your activity measures, I'm remaining very sensitive on developmentally within the city and what we're expecting over the next 18 to 24 months, particularly if the economy holds. And I went back to 2019, since that seems to be sort of the last regular year of life, and looking at what you're projected out for 2021 and 2022. For 2021 and 2022, that's a 23 to 25% increase in your workload. And I just want to call that out to the fellow members on this committee. So I'm very cautious in wondering, especially if you're losing your planning intern potentially, along with doing the UDO rewrite, and your staff having just come off of doing the Parkland acquisition study. I know that was very time consuming as well. And I don't know the answer. I haven't found a place yet to find money, but I want to just raise the red flag alert that I think that we rely on our planning department and engineering too, because they work together very closely. But as these projects come in for review, and their workload is very, very heavy, we want to make sure that we have developers that are able to get shovels in the ground, and we can ultimately start realizing the benefits of that tax relief, particularly from businesses. So in my mind, this is a place, I don't know administratively if it's something that could be shared between engineering and planning to help coordinate the activities between you two, or if there are other computer packages available that would improve your efficiency of that type of position might warrant a good look.
All right, thank you for those comments. Any other comments for the planning department? All right, let's go ahead and move on.
And that begins on page 145.
I'd just like to start off with some informational background on our department. We run about 4,500 emergency calls per year. These range from very simple EMS medical calls where maybe we have a wheelchair into bed. We do a lot of that type of stuff. But on the high end of that range is the multi-alarm structure fires, major medical events like cardiac arrests. The range on any given day swings wildly between those types of incidents. Our staffing, we have 3 fire stations that we currently staff. Our current minimum staffing is 11 personnel per day, 24/7, 365. One of those is our officer in charge, our battalion. One of those is our officer in charge, our battalion chief. The other 10 are deployed in teams of 2 on 5 separate apparatus. 3 of those are frontline transporting paramedic units. Those are where we transport people to the hospital. Again, that's our bread and butter. The other 2 are deployed on the engines. Even though the majority of our calls are EMS, we need to have equipment in place to be able to respond to those. The thing is, all personnel are trained to the paramedic level, and all of our apparatus are equipped to be able to treat to that highest level of medical care. So if 2 of our ambulances are out transporting somebody to the hospital and an engine shows up first, we can still provide that highest level of medical care. You don't know what we're dealing with, so when you see how those 2 personnel will really be able to help us, we've made some changes in the bargaining agreement that really let us maximize 2 positions, whereas usually it takes 6 people to get us to, 2 more per shift. That puts another rig on the road. And with the changes in the bargaining agreement, we've been able to reduce the amount of allotted time off, which means more of our current staff is in the station more hours. And to have these 2 flex people that we can kind of put where we need to maximize that, it's really going to help us. It's not the finish line, but it's a good step in the right direction. So with that, I will get into our specific operating lines. For the most part, our operating lines are fairly flat. There's 2 areas where increases are becoming more and more significant. The cost of medical supplies and drugs has been skyrocketing even before COVID. Drugs that when 10 years ago when I was ordering cost 9 cents a vial are now $10 a vial. And this is stuff that we use constantly every day. It's gone up by that big of a percentage. And that's not uncommon. The thing is that COVID, where to stay safe on any given day when we know we're dealing with sick patients, everybody in the world now needs this stuff. Prices have shot through the roof. Though the market has somewhat stabilized on most of at least the personal protective equipment, prices are still high, and that's probably going to continue. Air reports are done on iPads. They have air cards, wireless connections. We need subscriptions to all those. We pay maintenance fees for all of those. All of our CAD information is received on those iPads. We actually have 2 per rig, one for the patient care report, one to that. So again, there's fees and licensing for all that. That's been historically an increase over the last couple years. Other than that, I think for the most part, operating is fairly flat, or 1 to 3% increase based on expected cost increases for stuff that we order, like turnout gear, just equipment and supplies, stuff that's pretty expensive anyway, but that we expect to get 10 years out of if we properly maintain them. So that's been a big focus for us also, is to actually pay to have stuff repaired and maintained and inspected and recertified by the manufacturer. That's a new requirement of the NFPA as far as our protective gear that we wear. So that's kind of an additional expense. We've actually moved some of that we wear. So that's kind of an additional expense. We've actually moved some of that from our capital requests every year into our operating budget. So it represents an increase in our operating, but we won't be doing those capital requests every year. One big capital item is Lucas devices. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but if you do look it up or Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. These are devices that do mechanical CPR chest compressions. They're pretty amazing. And this is the one thing that I can truly say, these will save lives. other things you can't say a statement that strong. You know, you can't say an additional person would have. Things you can't say a statement that strong. You know, you can't say an additional person would have saved a life, but these Lucas devices will save lives. And they're rapidly becoming the industry standard for cardiac arrest treatment. Very much higher survival rates, and higher survival rates with good, which is the important part of this. The other bigger items are thermal imaging camera replacement. Ours are, I believe, around 10 years old. The technology is old. There's been some failures. Maintenance and battery life are becoming destined to replace half this year, half next year. We don't want to have two different frontline pieces of equipment that are different brands, different manufacturers. When you're using this equipment, you're using it in a zero visibility situation. You don't want to try to remember which one I have and where the on button is and things like that. It lets us find the fire in zero visibility conditions, but this is also the technology that lets us locate a victim in those conditions. So it's a pretty important item for us. It's a very high priority as well. And the last thing that's in there that is the big elephant in the room, so to speak, is we're due for an engine replacement. This is the scheduled replacement of this engine. We replaced one 2 years ago. That one schedule was knocked off 20 years ago by decisions made in the past. That's why we were replaced off 20 years ago by decisions made in the past. That's why we're replacing these so close together. There was one several years ago that was in an accident that actually got replaced early, and now to replace that one again 2 years ago, and this one is actually scheduled to be replaced in 2020. And this one is actually scheduled to be replaced in 2022. One notable thing is we are not at this time replacing our ladder truck. Ladder truck is quite a bit more expensive than an engine or pumper. And it's also, for a bigger structure fire, we are getting companies from all over the county. There's a much more robust mutual aid system in place than previously. So we will not be planning to replace that truck, which was actually due in 2020, but at some future point, that's really a best guess at this point. The last one we did 2 years ago was in the 630s. These are made of stainless steel, which we know stainless steel prices are fluctuating and going up. We've heard that a lot of the equipment prices are going up by up. I believe that's all I have.
The only other thing, maybe now's a good time to mention it, is there are a lot of facility needs at the fire department, as well as a number of our other buildings across the city. What we tried to do this year is take that out of the department hands, so they didn't have to worry about that. We are going to be bringing an item to council on the October 5th meeting that'll be requesting approximately $300,000 for a number of high priority increase maintenance items. We also have money established in the budget. You'll see under administration $350,000 per year for facility improvements, as well as maintenance dollars. So we've been really focusing on that. Departments have been wonderful. We have a company by the name of Industrial Roofing Services. They did a survey for the city back in spring of 2020, identified a lot of things. They're just doing a little recon on that right now, and we're getting the process going. So that's going to just be a little bit of a shift. You're not going to see some of these larger facility or hardscape or electronic repairs throughout the departments. You're going to see that a little bit more focused.
I thought you saw on that listing, wasn't it?
There's actually a garage roof replacement, which is actually not a very high dollar item. All of our other roofs at this point are Station 1 was replaced, I want to say, about 4 years ago. And Station 3.
Comments, I had one here from Alderman.
Okay, and thank you very much. And Ms. Stino, you kind of touched on the question that I was going to have as I was reading through the footnotes of your budget. And I sort of read a couple of times where department personnel make many of this great, they're multi-talented and multitasking, but I would guess you, and I don't know if this is also happening at the police station, but that's not necessarily what y'all have been hired for. And is it in any way taking away from your ability to do other things?
We are busy running calls to the point that we're having trouble keeping up with many other things. Our training commitments, there's continuing education commitments that we have to maintain our licensure. All of that stuff gets harder to education commitments that we have to maintain our licensure. All of that stuff gets harder to achieve during the duty day when we're running as many calls as we're running. And I'd just like to mention, I said 80% of our calls are EMS. The vast majority of those are tied to residential development. The vast majority of those are tied to residential development. So that's what's coming in, and you can see all the apartments that are being proposed and all the houses that are coming in. That's what really drives the increase in our call volume. And a lot of these, any commercial drives the increase in our call volume. And a lot of these, any commercial development, any multifamily residential, we have an obligation then to also inspect that property every square foot twice per year for most of them. So there is, that's driving our inspection need as well. So there is, that's driving our inspection need as well.
Do you want to just mention, do you have
go
some
ahead.
questions? I was just going to say, perhaps, Chief, you want to just mention the facility, the Fire Station 2 replacement, and what's going on with that for the committee?
Yes, so current Station 2 was built near the industrial park, I believe with impact money tied to the industrial park about 20 years ago. The problem was that impact fees do not pay for staffing, and that station was never adequately staffed. There were the two other stations that were better staffed to form a team of two down at that station. It's not well positioned to serve anything but the industrial park, and we now know, after looking at 20 years of data, that the industrial park doesn't really generate call volume. It's, again, tied to, one, we need to staff that station, but two, we also need to move it to where it's better going to serve our needs, not just in that developing southwest area, but a better location will let that station support our other two stations when they get busy and they're out of quarters. So it benefits citywide coverage to move this. Ideal location is as close to 76 and Rawson as we can, or Ryan Road, I'm sorry, not Rawson, as we can be, because we know those are going to be the best roads for 30, 40, 50 years into the future. We don't know where any particular senior housing or development or factory is going to be, but going to be for, like I said, 50 years in the future. So that's the proposal. The question was, do we need to eventually staff a fourth station in the southwest? Or if we move that station from its current location on 60th Street to a better, more serviceable location, can we exist potentially 50 years into the future, which is a bit of a gamble in how long that will pay off and whether it's really not, because that central location is really, we can add more people to it eventually at some point, and it's still going to be in the best location. So that's what we're proposing.
Design, we're doing some pre-design work right now, like an exploratory study. The design is planned for that in 2023, and hopeful building in the 2 years after that.
Take over the DPW works yard,
It's part of that DPW expansion project, and that's why this fits so well together and why now it's coming in on the southwest part of the city. That type of housing worries us a little bit because lightweight construction, especially open concept lightweight construction, especially with all the, what's the word I'm looking for? Fire spreads very quickly in these new houses just because of their design and the materials they're built out of, as opposed to houses that were built in like the 50s and 60s. And when we're building them in what were formerly open farm fields, lightning storms give me nightmares right now. So do we have the resources in the right places to be able to respond to these incidents, or do we wait until bad things start happening? We know the right thing to do, and the DPW project at this point makes this the right time to do it.
There's also the consideration of the...
Do it.
There's also the consideration of the water source out there, right? But that is probably another topic. But that southwest area is also a new water tower in the works also. Am I correct?
We can get to
Tower in the works also. Am I correct?
we can get to that particular topic when we have Public Works here on our next meeting.
Okay. Yes, to my left. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you again. I just want to clarify then, with the request of the safety equipment, the 28.5, the thermal imaging cameras, and that is 4. And while it does not, I'm not seeing it in the mayor's recommended budget, but we do show it in our capital improvement plan. Am I correct here?
Yes, it's on page 251.
There we are. At the 20, there we have it at the 28. At the 20, there we have it at the 28.5. So that is the 4, and that's not just half of.
No, that's all 4 of them.
Okay.
One of the Lucas devices, I believe, got pushed into 2023, but we can deploy those.
Okay.
We can change how we deploy those to. We can deploy those.
Okay.
We can change how we deploy those to maximize that as well.
Okay.
Is the intent going forward that the personnel would, as we hire them and bring them on or replace them, would in all cases be?
That's where we're at right
Okay.
now.
Is that becoming pretty common? I mean, we're obviously not the only community seeing those trends, but is that the way the workforce is coming to us, or are we trying to, or not yet?
I think most departments are leaning that direction. Departments that still have people only trained as EMTs and firefighters, sometimes from another community when they really need that level of care, whereas all of our people can provide the highest level of care immediately upon arriving. It lets us really get the maximum out of the limited number of positions that we have, because everybody can do every job.
For my benefit or less, how does this flex position work? I'm just curious, very simplistically.
So normally people are assigned to a regular rotating schedule. They work one day on, one day off, one day on, one day off, one day on, one day on, one day off, one day on, and then they have 4 days off. It's their set schedule. They know what it is. It rotates. These 2 positions above and beyond the 39 of the current number of our bargaining agreement, if they were, we can assign them as needed, whether it be to take up overtime where there's a vacant shift, or sometimes there might be a shift that's above our minimum staffing that we're at 12, and if we put a 13th minimum staffing that we're at 12, and if we put a 13th person on that shift, it puts 4 people at Station 2 and puts another apparatus on the road and into that mix as we try to manage all these subsequent calls that are often ongoing at the same time. I would like to see these positions, they don't always work with the same officer to act as mentor. What we are trying to do, and we're still working this out with the bargaining unit, is to, when we hire entry-level people and plug them in on those shifts, that we free up senior guys who have worked on every shift, who know all the bosses and the ins and outs of how every...
Concept, and I like the flexibility, because it seems like whether we get somebody injured or off
Right.
for funeral leave or in court or who knows what, obviously the 24/7 doesn't change for you.
Right.
Other questions? Yes?
And if I could,
It's in the capital side on 251. So it's in
okay,
and funded fully.
I see it here, but because it wasn't back here in,
In the operating, yep, you won't see it in the operating budget
Gotcha.
at all. You'll only see it in the capital side. So the detailed budget pages for the
Gotcha.
financial system behind it will have them.
thank you,
Detailed budget pages for the
Gotcha.
financial system behind it will have them.
thank you.
So all of these are.
Now I'm on board.
So one of the questions that's come from the committee is what's included in the capital and what's not included in the capital. If you would go to page 250, which is to page 250, which is the first page of the capital listing. Under the project year appropriations on the right-hand side, there's a 2022 column. If there's an amount in that column, then it is included in the mayor's recommended budget. And then to the left of that would be the funding source that's going to pay for it. So in most cases, it's going to be funded by whatever resources are in the particular fund. In some cases, there might be impact fees or other forms of resources available, other kinds of issues. But the funding sources to the left, that 2022 mayor recommend column, that is the column that says how much of the request is included in the budget.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was paging back and forth, and I saw the first rendition of this come out, and it's like I saw all the zeros and whatever, so. Okay, other questions for the fire department?
So maybe just one more answer on that one. Everything is zeros on the adopted in the operating budget. If you go to page 147, you're going to see the requests, but not adopted. So if that's causing any kind of confusion, maybe just a little explanation on that.
Got it, adopted, different word, not requested and mayor suggested, or recommended, or whatever term mayor recommended, I guess, is the terminology.
So the terms that finance has been using over the years is a department request indicating what the department head has asked for. Then there would be a mayor's recommended version, which is what we are looking at now. That would then become a proposed budget. After any changes that the council might make, and it would then go to the public hearing notice, which would be a proposed budget. And finally, there would be an adopted budget, which is the outcome after the public hearing and the council's final consideration of the budget.
One last question, looking closer now, the engine is in that column I see as recommended. I know those guys up in Appleton, I think, are pretty busy. Can you even get that? What, is it 6-12 months?
We're looking at, we've been told about 440 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got a year.
How much, what is that, Paul?
655 estimate. A year.
What is that, Paul?
655 estimate. And inflation on top of that. Anyway, other questions for the police department? Or, excuse me, fire department. Thank you for your information and time.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
helpful.
You want to ask him about the,
Information and
Thank
time.
you.
Very
Thank
helpful.
you want to ask him about the tires or anything? Thank you, Chief.
And thank you to Assistant Chiefs.
Yes, thank you, Chief.
The next item on your agenda is the police department. Chief Oliva is here. 25 in terms of the operating budget. There is some grant money on page 238, and then the capital budget is on 252. Chief Oliva.
Good evening. Well, I think you all know what type of services the police department provides for the city. I do not plan to have any, I don't plan on reducing any programs or projects that we had this year. So if our calls for service remain similar or as we project, I believe we can handle it with existing personnel. That being said, in our business, you never can predict exactly. My biggest concern is the threat from Milwaukee, and that crime level certainly has increased over the years, and we've seen an influx of Milwaukee area criminals come in our city and commit a series of crimes, and we've had to address it. And then we have any given time a major event that takes up a lot of our personnel, more than we can handle. A few of those were made the news recently. We're still investigating a potential homicide. We are investigating a large-scale major homicide. We are investigating a large-scale major marijuana growing operations in the city, and we had the officer-involved shooting not too long ago. So those are can be a drain on our resources, both funding and officers. As you see, I have not asked for any new personnel for next year. And one way I believe I can do that, and I have done it in the past, and I continue, is to rely on technology. I believe that's the best way to address some of the increases in demand for service. So you see in our capital budget that there is a number of technology requests. Most of my capital, majority of my capital, is just replacement items for things that we currently use. There are a few new items that we've asked for, including some fixed cameras, both overt and covert. We asked for 4. Mayor is going to fund one, automatic license plate reader, which we have one now in place. It's very productive, and we plan on using that in another high-value area of the city. And all these technologies for additional personnel, so that's why those are included. Our operating budget was, I'd say, belt-tightened in a number of areas. Most of those areas were reduced based on historical spending in those categories. So if all remains equal, I think we'll be fine. But some of those I think are pretty on the razor thin side. So if things change, I might have to come back, but hopefully not. I did ask for 4 squads, and the mayor's recommending money enough for 3. Again, I think I could squeeze a 4th one with a little bit more funding. It's hard to predict because, again, automobiles, the pricing isn't out. The pricing won't come out until sometime next year when the state gets the state price on it. And then we have the issue with Ford changing the body style, which requires us to buy new equipment to outfit it. So all that really drives the cost of squads up. So that's one thing we didn't get, I should say, one extra car. And then one drone that we asked for was not approved. But everything else basically that we really needed was
Overtime is always a wild card. We plug in a number, does it seem to work? We make it work, or thoughts, comments? I'm not always sure. When we hear about it, it sounds like maybe it's how do I want to say, more of an issue sometimes than the fire side, maybe, or at least. But I'm just curious how it's been running, and I think the number we have is what, 290 in there for the
number. We do have the largest department in the city. We have the most personnel, run 24/7, and a lot of our overtime is unpredictable. Again, we can go weeks with virtually none, and then we have a major incident where we have everybody coming in, like, again, the officer-involved shooting. We tied up our whole day shift working on our neighboring departments, which helps. So that's part of the reason why we don't have to ask for more personnel, because we help each other. But that only goes so far, because in that example there, Oak Creek had several officers involved in that shooting, so they couldn't provide any help. Greenfield had officers involved in that shooting, so yeah, that can run up the overtime numbers quickly, very quickly. So,
Other comments or questions for the chief?
Looks like it did a little on overtime last year.
yes, yeah, we make an effort to minimize the use of overtime, and we do make an effort to minimize the use of overtime, and we do what we can. I think we do it very efficiently, and where we can avoid it, we avoid it. And I can say that nearly all, if not all, of the overtime that's expended it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable.
Just one comment.
Yes, go ahead, Alderman.
Chief, I just want to put out there that I appreciate all the communication with the major events lately and some of the arrests that have been made. I think the communication's been excellent, because we get calls from constituents and they kind of coincide with constituents, and they kind of coincide with either a press release or an email. So I do appreciate the updates.
You're welcome, and again, and just so you know, we provide as much as we can, and some of the times we can't give you everything you probably want, and especially in a timely manner, but we do.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much, Chief.
You're welcome.
We will move on.
Animal control, which is pages 206 and 207. One might think of this as one of the quieter corners of the city government plate.
So this budget is pretty standard. What happens is we work with MADIC on that. It's, the Milwaukee counties. MADIC does a really good job. They participate in our ICC meetings on a regular basis, providing a lot of information, letting us know where they're at. They've been doing some really good things in recent years with regard to planning for capital needs and things. So the budget is really flat compared to how it used to be. And they do that compared to how it used to be. And they do a really good job with operations as well. They're still pulling in a lot of volunteers, so the operations costs that they do have are extremely valid.
All right. Animal control. Anybody have any questions? All right. Animal control. Anybody have any questions there? Contracted services. What else do we have?
Last but not least on today's agenda is the recreation, which is page 208 in your book. Now, this actually then can also be using page 236. The city established separate funds for the two major recreation activities in the city. There's a fund for St. Martin's Fair, and there's a fund for civic celebrations. And the major resource in that area are ticket sales for beverages and other kinds of activities, and then a number of businesses in the community provide donations to the city to help sponsor those activities. There are costs for several of the activities, but also for public works and public safety folks to help out at that event. And then the other one would be the St. Martin's Fair, which is on the very next page, page 237. The issue for St. Martin's Fair is that because of the public safety costs that are involved and some of the public works folks that help out at that fair frequently does not generate sufficient resources to pay for all of the services that the city is providing for that. And a couple of years ago, the city made a one-time contribution to that fund to help move it out of a deficit position. But you'll note that for next year, it's again budgeting a nearly a $24,000 deficit. We may end up having to put some additional resources in that. We may end up having to put some additional resources in that. Alderman Nelson wants to say something.
If I could, I think
ahead.
we are to a point with this, my favorite event, period. And I always, whenever there's anybody being event, period. And I always, whenever there's anybody being critical about the fair on the board and the panel, I always look at me and they get angry and they get bitter about the St. Martin's Fair. And Dandry wanted to cancel it and move it to Florida. What I think we should do is I think now's the time where we need to really look at, well, we've got DPW, we've got police, we've got fire. This event used to be much, much bigger. Many more bad things used to happen at this fair. I mean, a lot. We've cut down the time for. What I'm saying is the things that have been. A lot. We've cut down the time for. What I'm saying is the things that have been adjusted. DPW, we still need. There's a lot of things that DPW should be there for, but maybe it's time that we look at and asking the police to look at their safety plans. Do we need this much staff? Because back 8-10 years ago, I used to request, when I chaired the Fair Commission, after action reports from the police and fire. Calls for service, types of calls for service. Then the shock factor came in with how much it costs to operate this. It's a portion of the city that has an event going on. Do we have to decide, my public safety hat on, we are ensuring almost a very safe, family-friendly event. And what's the cost of that? And when you've got over 100,000 people coming each day on a sunny 80-degree weekend like we just had, I think perhaps we should ask department heads to count 24,000. I think that's a good place to start.
How was the attendance this year?
Well, there's nobody out there with a hand counter, they lose their fingers, but it's in years past when the news media would be over with their helicopters and they would take these little shots or whatever, and they would determine per square inch how many people, and it didn't move over different times. It was definitely over 100,000 again, because I'm just comparing it to years past when we had very wonderful weather and it just was good. It was very heavily attended. There, some vendors were down a little bit, whether they came back from COVID. Some neighbors didn't want, vendors were down a little bit, whether they came back from COVID. Some neighbors didn't want to rent their spaces out this year. The new St. Martin's Road has made it more difficult for areas to have renters. So I think the fair and its footprint is shrunk. I don't think we have the huge crowds. We definitely don't have the fights and all the other crap that went on because we have the huge crowds. We definitely don't have the fights and all the other crap that went on because we have earlier end times for music and beer. So I think perhaps maybe we don't, we need to look at that a little bit. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but the majority of the police and fire that are out there, especially the police, are on overtime.
And that would...
That's a lot of money.
Right. So the staffing would be on the streets if they weren't at the fair. So some of the costs, we're not going to hire more officers because we have that event, but we do charge the event for whatever officer time is spent. And if it's at overtime, it's expensive time.
And back on page 208 with regard to those relatively small budgets, we do have the travel program in there, and that is still going. They just had their first event basically since COVID, so that's really good news. We did continue to fund the other portion, the Franklin Senior Citizens, Inc., even though they disbanded. I think you heard that earlier tonight.
All right, any other comments regarding recreation? Hearing none? Yes, we move on. What do we have next here?
We're at the item 4 question.
Maybe that's one of them, about the St. Martin's Fair, for police and fire. I on purpose and by design on this, because the two gentlemen are here, knowing what DPW's commitments are and how well they do and keep that place up, I don't want to touch that. But I definitely would like to look at police and fire and what they can trim from that budget.
Does anybody have any other specific questions, I guess, I think is what Paul's getting at, as we look at the agendas forthcoming. The biggest one, again, would probably be DPW, and I'm just looking at my notes. Is that slated for?
Public Works does have a fair amount of the capital requests, so you might spend some time on looking what the capital requests are in Public Works and Parks. Look at that before the meeting.
Do we have any further insight into projected landfill siting for the remainder of '21?
For 21 side of the ledger, my running total right now is about 2.5 million. Earlier, I think I've been flashing about 2.4 million, and in our budget is 2.1 million. So we're going to be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 more receipts in what we budgeted.
So that will, since the '21 budget is formulated, that'll go right to fund balance?
Yes.
So there'd be an opportunity if we needed potentially to.
You will see some of, if you recall, at our June meeting, we talked about various fund balances and other resources that might be available. When we get to our final meeting, and then we actually, instead of looking at the individual projects, which you're seeing on pages 250 through 252, projects which you're seeing on pages 250 through 252, we'll look at the individual capital funds, and you'll see what's happening to those fund balances. If you wanted to take a look at that prior to that meeting, the capital funds are summarized beginning on page 20. Capital funds are summarized beginning on page 26, and there's a 3 or 4 page section there indicating what the resources and the expenditures are. And that goes back to that summary page that we talked about at the very beginning, your page 8. The capital funds are expected to, your page 8, the capital funds are expected to have a deficit of $12 million, and most of that is going to be funded by either beginning fund balance or transfers in from other funds. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail when we get to your final meeting. So when
we say fund balances, we mean capital fund balances, not operating. So we wouldn't let it run to the general fund balance. Paul, I think the finance director's been splitting it between a couple of the capital funds that are higher users of funds, and that's been a really good source to what he just explained.
But the bottom line is we may have a few dollars there that are above our estimates, which is nice because there'll be a few spaces where we'll have some dollars that are below. I'm going back. I just want to clarify, Paul, with a revised same schedule for the Thursday with inspection, fire, police, and we'll have then DPW on
Next Thursday.
Yeah, there's the big ones before you get engineering and highway and street and whatever. I mean, those take up some major dollars. So if there's something specifically or thinks of, would like to see above just, kind of the standard numbers and the requests and whatever, now's the time to do that.
But certainly if you had questions after the chance to review it, if you contacted Peggy or myself, we would be happy to look into something or respond to any inquiries that you might have.
Yes, and that's kind of been my approach, to try to get at least a review of the areas prior to the meeting as scheduled. So that's on the to-do list. But as far as meeting dates now, again, I'm hoping that we have our new alderperson back back at our next meeting, and possibly our Mr. Schmidt as well, right? If I understand it. So we're, yes, go ahead, John.
Yeah, just to make it, like I said at the very offset, Monday I will not be here. So hopefully one or two can now
Okay.
be here.
Well, John also. We'll make
Do
it-
we want to potentially schedule a different date?
Because the thing is, I have a meeting, so I'll be here like later, but if one of them are here,
Well, maybe we could just start later.
Do you want to start it?
but the thing is just, I don't have a lot of control about that meeting. It's a town board meeting that I present at. That's our monthly one. I do it every month. I would, hoping that, I understand I'm not gonna go on a tangent, but it's a commitment. One on the spot, show up meetings.
Well, that's a little bit out yet also. Let's see if
What about Tuesday night that week, the 12th? Because there are no other city meetings, I believe, scheduled for that
well, I
night.
was going to bring that up, but I didn't know
DPW?
how back to schedule it.
Kevin, does DPW meet on the second Tuesday?
Favorite meeting.
Does DPW meet on the second Tuesday?
Favorite meeting.
Okay, so, but are Alderman Nelson, are you committed to that meeting?
Yeah, but they have a quorum, so, everybody shows up, they're all dedicated groups, so if I had to exit and come to this one, I could.
Kevin, where does Public Works,
Exit and come to this one, I could.
Kevin, where does Public Works meet? So we would just have to move over to,
What time do you start?
6 o'clock. Yeah, if it was 4 o'clock, I'm sure we could probably get done.
So- so it's up, we know that the four of you can make it, I think.
Yeah.
For the 12th. If you wanted to do that on Tuesday the 12th, at 4 o'clock?
I can flex either way. I'll put it in my calendar. I can flex either way. I'll put it in my calendar regardless, so.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Well,
The 15th is,
about Dennis, I'm not doing nothing until Dennis commits. So we can play poker right now. So we can play poker right now.
we can also check with Alderman Hoffer and see if he's available for either of those dates. And we should be able to tell you by next Thursday what's going on with the following week.
I guess my thought is first, I don't know if the rest of the members here, but if it's all right for Monday the 11th, I think the effort should be made to keep it at that and just see if the others will commit to that before we change the date. That's just my 2 cents. I don't know how you all feel. Is that what the plan?
Yeah. We've got the wedding and folks in town, so Tuesday, I've made plans to make Monday work also. That is a Monday, correct?
Yes, the 11th is a Monday.
Yes. So I will, well, maybe the way we
We'll
leave it.
have more information at our
Yeah.
next meeting, and then you can decide which way you want to go.
We'll leave it as is with the,
Yes,
I
Should be in
think,
the binder.
it should be in the binders.
if you go back to the original one,
There was, right after the introduction and before the table of contents, there was supposed to be a memo that was there.
no, is it with the stapled packet, John?
Here, you can have this copy.
I think I took it out, probably misplaced it. I had so many meetings this week.
But just to review, that was, it sounds like if we follow this, it'll be economic development.
You have Public Works and General Government at your next meeting with Economic Development thrown in as well. And then the final meeting would be a wrap-up of and then the final meeting would be a wrap-up of the tax levy, the assessments, TID districts, and your capital funds.
Everybody good with that? Got it, it's this package here.
Yes, however, I'm looking at St. Martin's Fair on that agenda for the 7th. We didn't cover that tonight in the, under recreation.
It won't take us long to go back through it again.
And the clerk will be here that night, so I'm sure.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I think we're probably set. Police and fire are obviously huge pieces, but I mean, most of it's personnel, so yes,
I
Peggy?
do have one fire item, and it was just mentioned earlier when we were talking about overtime with the police. If you want to look at page 148 real quick, fire budget is the one that's been quite a bit over on overtime. We have been doing a lot of calculating. I've been working with the chief a lot to just see where things are at. The chief mentioned that we made some changes in bargaining this year, and what we were doing is basically buying back some time that we used to pay overtime at and paying for it at straight time, some holiday pay. So that's a big change in the bargaining. And then with the extra 2 flex positions, the chief does feel like the 215.5. The chief does feel like the 215.5 for next year is a viable number, whereas you can see for 2020 it was all the way up to 559,000.
Right.
Even in 2019 it was 295, and if you'd go back a number of years you would see it higher. And we made a concerted effort to really do some calcs on that during this process and just say, is that a legitimate number? And he felt much more comfortable with the new positions. He has the 2 new positions in the budget, the flex positions, so he can fill in where needed to reduce some overtime, the holiday payment, and then he also has a half-time fire inspector position time that he is looking at. It'll be on the October 5th council agenda as well, partnering with Oak Creek and sharing 1 full-time person. So that'll also relieve a bit of the pressure, especially from some of the day shifts. So that is a good number, but when it was discussed that one of the overtime budgets was over, I'm pretty sure the reference was to fire.
Okay. Some of these adjustments in the bargaining, and I'm just curious as to how maybe that's coming about. Are we pledging forward against the wave with other communities, or is this something that's happening elsewhere? Or kind of what's allowing this flexibility, or is there a change in the winds?
I think some of it is we really pushed it pretty far this year. We started negotiations back in October, and one of the top things on our list was that very item. It was on the last 2 negotiations, and we really didn't get anywhere. We took it all the way to mediation this year. We still have to pay for those holidays, so every time a firefighter's off for a 24-hour shift, that's $880 approximately. However, it's $880 and not $1,200, $1,300 with that time and a half of overtime. So we took it to mediation. We were willing to go all the way, and we talked to the council about it, had some support. So that was so. It's really a mixed bag when you go from community to community, but the fact that we just had the holidays built into our regular schedule, the firefighters were actually working under 100 days during the entire year. So we felt like our comps were in line with us, and our mediation day probably only lasted 4 or 5 hours. We got a settlement, so.
Well, it seems to fit. I remember having this discussion in the overtime, and before they got through it, well, you do this, you get injured, and then it's this, and then, before you get done, it's like, well, okay, so out of that whole period, did we work? And whatever. I don't want to, mention or get into the contract or language or whatever, but I mean, some of these things you have to look at them. Are they consistent? Does it make sense?
Right.
I think everyone's got an idea in terms of does it make sense?
Right.
I think everyone's got an idea in terms of what the benefits are and should be and what's to be included. So I'm glad to hear that, that there's some give and take in that. Anything else for the group.
One general question I have is,
Else for the group.
one general question I have is, what's going on with healthcare this year?
I think that's on the last night, but I can just give, in fact, funny thing you should ask, because I actually printed out some sheets, so if you have a few minutes, I'm happy to share it with you. I was just getting ready for the next meeting, so I'll give you. And the reason I have this so fresh is because we just spoke with the Personnel Committee at their meeting on Monday night about it.
I have to scoot in like 3 minutes, so I'm going to.
Okay.
But basically, what you have in front of you is just the 22 budget versus the 2021 budget. So really, there's not any, a huge amount of change, but if you look at the bottom of the 22 budget, you can just see a comparison between 2021 and 2022. Don't go to the, however, that's because we had 19 additional participants. If you look down on the bottom, so the cost per employee, we're looking at being reduced by $668 per participant. So that's our plan. We've been doing really well. We implemented that NICE program that we told you about last year, which is basically a mobile healthcare. Mobile come to us. They don't have bricks and mortar, but on-site, near-site health is usually the standard. That's been going very well. We've actually had a pretty high claim year this year. We have stop-loss claims of approximately 86,000 right now. Usually claims of approximately 86,000 right now. Usually in the last 3 to 4 years, we hadn't even used stop-loss, so we are in a little bit higher of a claim cycle right now. But overall, I think we're managing our costs really well. The 3 changes that we're looking at for next year, number one, a medical third-party administrator change. We currently are with United Healthcare. We're looking to go to UMR. Really good provider, less expensive, but really it's more of an operational change because they're actually a sister company to United Healthcare, but they work with self-funded plans a little bit. If we wanted to add some incentives for steerage or consumerism and things like that, so we're kind of trying to set ourselves up for the future on that.
Is that owned by United Healthcare then?
They are up, yes, they're under the same ownership umbrella. I'm not sure one's bigger or owner of the other one, but they are under the same owner. The same thing, we're with United Healthcare right now, going to Delta Dental, a pretty sizable cost savings, and a wider provider network, better discounts. On the health side, there's 0% disruption because the health provider network is the same for United Healthcare and UMR, you might guess, as far as what employees or their families have been using, and we're going to do a proactive campaign to make sure we handle that. But because dental is an allowance, $1,500 per year, we believe that employees are going to get a better bang for their buck on that change. And again, Delta Dental is very standard, really good at customer service. And then the third change is really just on kind of an inside thing, but it's a customer service center. We're with you. USI is our new provider, which is kind of our old provider because for our consulting we used to have Diversified. They got bought out by Associated Bank, and then they got bought out by USI, so United Bank, and then they got bought out by USI, so USI is now the provider, and they're a nationwide provider. They have a lot of resources. So we're looking at getting this thing called Benefit Resource Center. Basically, it's customized customer service to answer any questions that our employees might have. So it's just going to maybe ease up questions that our employees might have. So it's just going to maybe ease up a little of the pressure on our human resource person, as well as give employees one step closer to plan docs, providers if they need to help in finding providers. Network costs, any questions on invoices, et cetera, it can all go. The 3 unknowns right now are stop loss. If you compare those numbers from last year to this year, we're looking at a 14% increase. We're really not happy with that because we haven't used stop loss for a long time. Yes, we're using it this year to the tune of less than $100,000, but we pay $650,000 for it a year. So long-term disability and and life, because we got a 39% increase on life. On
We just
LTD.
lost our quorum,
Oh, we did.
Yeah.
so I think that will reflect the meeting.
Yeah.
So, but we'll talk about it more. So if you have any
Right.
questions, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, should we take a motion for adjourn?